Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining this special Thursday afternoon edition of Frequently Asked Fridays. Today we're going to be talking about the Roman Catholic Church's role in the historic sex abuse crisis. Unfortunately, the sex abuse crisis in the Roman Catholic Church is nothing new. In fact, it's been going on for centuries. And it's something which the church has known about, and the church has attempted to deal with, but dealt with phenomenally inappropriately for far too long. One of the key things is the idea of secrecy. That's very important to the church in the way they handle this. In fact, in a 1962 document that was enacted by the Vatican itself, so from the very, very top, the Crimen Solicitationis, about the crime of solicitation. The Vatican issued certain rules and manners of proceeding with respect to this crime of solicitation. First of all, solicitation? I thought that was when somebody went to a prostitute on the corner and it's a crime. It's not when an adult in a position of authority uses that position of authority to gain the trust of a child and sexually abuse a child. It's more than solicitation at that point. But the thing about this Crimen Solicitationis is that these instructions, they demanded the utmost confidentiality and permanent silence on the subject of a priest sexually abusing a child. And it indicates how long this process has been going on. So the 1962 document cited documents from a century or more earlier. Some documents go back to the 1600s that we can find and that we know of. And here's where it gets problematic. If anybody violates that oath of permanent silence, they're subject to automatic, permanent excommunication from the church. So that sets up this ultimate hypocrisy, right? If a priest is accused of sexual abuse, that priest is entitled to his own trial within the church, presided upon by the local bishop. He has the right to a trial. But God forbid anybody speaks about it in an effort to try and stop that sexual abuse. That person, automatic, immediate, permanent excommunication. That's the person that they sought to punish more, the person that talked about it. And that's just plain, flat out wrong. There's another portion of this Crimen Solicitationis which talks about crimen pessimum. That's the title to an entire section. The most obscene acts is what this section is for. And the most obscene acts refers to a sexual act by a cleric with a person of his own sex or with a pre-adolescent child. And when I first saw that, I was a little stunned. I mean, putting aside the church's position on homosexuality and putting that aside for the time being, which is a debate for another day, the worst, most obscene act is a sex act with a pre-adolescent child. What does that mean? It's not as bad if the kid was 13 or 14? That's just, again, speaks to the complete blindness that the church has had over a period of decades, if not centuries, concerning the nature of this very, very serious problem and the long-standing impact it has on that child. Sadly, the problem of sweeping it under the rug, of this ordered and mandated secrecy, is, the church's bigger concern was not about that child who was now going to face a lifelong series of psychological and psychiatric problems, PTSD, and carry this weight for his or her entire life. The problem is that wasn't where the church's thoughts and motivation was. It was rather with protecting its own reputation. But sometimes when you sweep things under the rug for a very long time, sooner or later it builds up, and that we've been at that point for a number of years now. It's time to face the music on this for the Roman Catholic Church. We've had the honor of representing, I can't tell you how many people, many people who are suing numerous dioceses across New York State. And I've taken part as their attorney in depositions of both sexually abusive priests and of bishops who were charged with supervising them. And what I can say is this: the approach to sexual abuse over the last half century in New York, and I am sure elsewhere, is number one, to set an incredibly low standard and an incredibly low bar for yourself. That's what the church did, which I'll get into in a moment. And then number two, fail to adhere to your own incredibly low standard. And that's what our experience has been. So the official position, for example, I took part along with dozens of other lawyers last year in the deposition of the Albany bishop. And the official position was, we did the best we could at the time with the knowledge we knew. We did the best we knew at the time was that, these once we heard of an allegation, we immediately sent the priest off to a treatment center where they could be treated for this. Well, that's an incredibly low standard and an incredibly low bar, because the bottom line is this is such a sickness that it does not get treated for. They come back and they reoffend, and that's the word the church uses, reoffend. They come back and molest children again and again and again. That bar they set for themselves, which is incredibly low, subjected countless additional children to unspeakable abuses. And what's really sad about that is they say, the treatment centers assured us it was safe to put that priest back into circulation, to let him go to a church, a school, have access to children. It was perfectly fine. But what we see is when they turn over the priest files on these priests, they've kept hundreds of pages of records about these priests, an article about them in the local newspaper, everything. You name it, it's in there, except for one thing isn't. The record from the treatment center that said it was okay to put the guy back in circulation and give him access to children. That's been thrown out, shredded, whatever they did. Those records are often discarded because it didn't say what the church said it said. It didn't support the church position, so for that reason those records were completely discarded, which is dishonest. It's sad, and it's just flat out wrong. But not only was this low standard an inappropriately low standard, they didn't even adhere to their own low standard. So we're involved in a number of cases with repeat offender priests, and I don't want to go through all of them and all of the facts, but we have a case involving sexual abuse by one priest. And with respect to this priest, the very, very, very first assignment he ever had after being ordained as a priest, he got fired from because a young man went to the people at his parish and said, "He's touching me, he's sexually abusing me." They didn't send him to treatment, which is what they said their policy was. They sent him to the next church. And guess what happened there? It happened again to another young boy. And that young boy, his mom made sure to take it all the way to the bishop. The bishop, who swore under oath that these people would be sent to a treatment center, didn't do that. Instead, the bishop reassigned him to a school. Great idea. Take a repeat offender pedophile priest and put him in a school where he's going to have access to what? An countless number of young, impressionable children. Well, guess what happened there? He got fired for the same problem that happened before. And rather than send him to treatment then, they sent him to a fourth assignment. He lasted there 4 months before he got fired because, once again, a child came forward and notified his pastor and then a bishop that that particular priest had been sexually abusing, violating, and molesting him. In that case, the bishop then finally, after offense after offense after offense, told the guy, you got to go for treatment. And he said, no, I'm not going for treatment. I'm not doing it. He took a leave of absence, and the bishop gave him a letter of recommendation so he could get a job in a school in another state. No information provided to that school as to this priest's sordid history. And then when he came back and went for treatment, the records are thrown out, missing. He started violating and offending children right away. And unfortunately, in that case, our client was one of the last ones on the line, 15 years after, almost 15 years after the first reports of abuse within the church. This man was allowed to take a young boy up in an airplane to be alone with him in the rectory, and unspeakable acts occurred. And the church's official position in that case is we didn't do anything wrong. Well, on behalf of the parishioners of these churches, on behalf of the people, we respectfully disagree, and we expect to be going to trial on that case, hopefully in the not too distant future. I could talk about many, many, many more cases like that, and many, many, many more fact patterns than that, but time is running low. So there are two additional things I want to talk about before I get to what I propose as the response to this crisis which the church should take. Number one is the phrase acting out. And I use the phrase acting out not as my words, but as the official words of the church. When you see a priest file, Father so-and-so was found to be acting out, what they're really saying is that the priest was molesting a child. But they don't want to say that because, you can't say that. That would be, secrecy. That would be scandalous. That would be all these other things. But, so instead they call it acting out. There's no mention of the child, no mention of how the kid's doing, and the priest was just acting out. I'm sorry. I struggle with that description of a priest forcing a child to orally copulate them. Because to me, acting out is when a 3-year-old refuses to eat his vegetables and throws himself or herself on the floor, kicking and screaming. That's acting out. The crime of rape, of sexual abuse, and of molestation of a child is a little more than acting out. And the church had a systemic response to minimize it and sweep it under the rug, and that's just wrong. The second thing is the concept that we've all heard about in the medical context, informed consent. As a parent, I want to know what's going on, where I allow my child to be educated, where I allow my child to be reared and mentored. They never told anybody. They'd move the priest from point A to point B. They wouldn't tell the pastor at the new church, the person who's supposed to be supervising this repeat offender pedophile priest. And they wouldn't tell the congregation because, and I kid you not, this is the exact response, well, then people wouldn't want to come to church. You're darn right. But as a parent, I believe that you have the right to know who it is that you're entrusting your child with. I said on a previous episode that I'm privileged to be the commissioner of basketball for a local youth sports organization here in Brooklyn. Every single person gets a background check. Every single person. Here, move them along to the next place. The pastor doesn't even know. Nonetheless, the parent. And that's just wrong. So what is the right response for the Roman Catholic Church? Because let's be clear. You need to separate a blind adherence to an institution from the teachings of Jesus Christ. At the end of the day, the teachings of Jesus will live on. People will continue to use his words and actions as a moral guidepost in their life. Whether the church responds to this crisis correctly or not. The church is on their own with this, and they can't cloak themselves as being the voice of Jesus. Jesus has his own voice, with all due respect. The church must make a meaningful response, and a meaningful response that shows that they're willing to accept pain for all the pain they inflicted. Now, my modest proposal that I've written about previously is this. Bankruptcy is not the way to go. If the Roman Catholic churches declare a bankruptcy, as several dioceses in New York State have already done, the bankruptcy they are declaring is not merely legal, but it's a moral bankruptcy as well. To tell your survivors of this epidemic of abuse that was occurring that they have to wait years and years and years in a bankruptcy court to get pennies on the dollar for the distress and grief and post-traumatic stress and the lifestyle changes. Many of these people have become alcoholics and drug addicts, and many of them became alcoholics and drug addicts after they were introduced to alcohol and drugs by the priest as a means to get their defenses down. No, you can't make them wait, and you can't make them accept pennies on the dollar. The church must be willing to feel a little bit more pain than that. I respectfully submit that as one of the wealthiest landowners in the state, and quite frankly in the country, they could sell 20 or 25% of their art, sell 20 or 25% of their land and their churches, and set up a fund that adequately compensates these people for the lifetime of recollections, distress, and abuse that they endured because a pedophile priest was sent from point A to point B to point C, and it was swept under the rug for decades. Thank you for joining Frequently Asked Fridays. Are there any questions? So those are the questions that we were previously asked about the church sex abuse crisis, and I'm glad that I've been able to address that important issue today. Please join us next week on Frequently Asked Fridays, where my sister and partner Andrea Benina will be discussing product liability cases and answering all your questions, because on Frequently Asked Fridays, when you have questions, we have answers. Thank you.